Aloha. I'm Dan Big Leaf, your host for Figments, the power of imagination. And today's a big show for me. It's going to be a little different. Those of you who have tuned in before have seen me talk with amazing guests who have incredible stories of how they turned their dreams into reality. But today I'm imagining equality and thinking about my experience with racism in the military. And it's going to be a tough conversation because this is a difficult issue. It's an issue that needs to be addressed, and I need to address it personally. And before I go on, I will address something you might be wondering about. If I'm talking about racism in the military, why do I have a Harley Davidson theme? I've got my Harley Davidson shirt and my current bike in the background. You have to stay tuned to the end, and you will get it. I promise. So this is an important issue, and for me, I'm trying to repay some of the many debts I owe to this country and also to the African Americans who played a disproportionate role in my success as a military officer. And I'm going to say some things that some of you won't like. You might even hate them or take issue with them. And please, let's have a conversation. You can contact me at info at phase-1.com, and I'll be glad to discuss it with you. This is my story, not about me and my perspectives and what I think I've learned. So let's talk, let's not yell. I think that's really important. So I am, and I'll give a little more background than I ordinarily will on myself because I'm from a very Caucasian town in northern Wisconsin. Somehow I got into the Air Force and went to pilot training. As you see on the left, I think it's on your left. The image is blurred because the memories have blurred because that's so many years ago. 1975 is when that photo was taken. And then on the right, that's in my last assignment at Headquarters Pacific Command here in Hawaii. And at that moment, I'm in command of 335,000 uniformed personnel as a three-star general. Pretty amazing. I'm still amazed. But again, this story is not about me. It's about what I learned over that career about racism and what I think we need to do as a nation and a military. And it's not because I'm mad at my nation or hate our history, but I do believe that a nation can be great and even good, good and even great, and yet imperfect and have a long way to go. And we have a long way to go. And the world needs us to travel that distance because we are founded on principles of freedom, liberty, and equality. We haven't fully met that yet, but we are the exemplar, and we have to be because the other nations that have the capacity generally do not have the inclination to lead that sense of a free and open world where people and nations have the opportunity to succeed equally. So that's why I'm doing this to repay that debt. Though I grew up in a very Caucasian environment, very, very Caucasian environment, my first hero was a black man, Henry Aaron. He played for the Milwaukee Braves. Uh, Man, he was a great baseball player. Sadly, passed away earlier this year. I loved watching him play, but the truth is, it was the '50s, so I listened to him play on the car radio and listened to him and the Braves beat the New York Yankees. I'm trying to say that politely in the 1957 World Series. I was 5 years old, but it still mattered. And I think the color of his skin mattered to me because he was my first hero. And he lived a life that was worthy of that title. After baseball, his baseball career is legendary, but after baseball, he made a difference as an American and as an African American. And my first hero had a big impact on me. My second hero was Caucasian, so Vince Lombardi, born in Green Bay, raised near there. And the reason he was my hero was not just because he brought championships to a small town of 100,000 people in Green Bay and set a standard for winning, but because he was a champion of equal opportunity. And he brought a significant number of African American players to the Green Bay Packers and insisted that they be treated not just as members of the team, full members of the team, but as members of the community. I suspect that came from his background as the son of Italian American immigrants in New York, and that he had seen plenty of bias and prejudice and racism of different color in his own experience. And so he was hero number two. The next person who influenced me a lot was Martin Luther King. And I wouldn't say he was a hero, he was an incredibly important public figure and was absolutely in my consciousness even as a young adolescent and teen. And it came directly into my consciousness in 1967 after his death, when race riots racked 109 US cities. And I felt it personally because in 1967 I was either 14 or just turned 15. I'm not sure of the date. I was on a bus trip back from Kansas to my home, stopped in Milwaukee, and the city was shut down because of the riots. And I think they kicked us out of the bus station for a while. And I may have spent 12 hours in Milwaukee wondering if I was ever going to get home. I may have been scared. I don't remember that. I do remember being sad for my country, that that's where we were, not angry, but sad. So that decade of unrest led me into college, graduation, and getting into the military. When I joined the military, I found as close to a meritocracy as could be, especially as a fighter pilot. It's a beautiful life. I was so blessed. And it's a beautiful life because what matters is how you do your job. Because the sky isn't the limit, the ground is. And failure to perform has life and death consequences, even in peacetime. It wasn't a kind and gentle meritocracy. If you didn't do well, they didn't say, "Oh, Leaf, you could do that better." It was a lot harsher than that, but it was a meritocracy, and that's what I wanted for my country. And even in the 70s, we were actually graded on equal opportunity. So there was that element of merit. I have here an excerpt from my performance report, the grade that I got for equal opportunity. That's the middle grade. Very difficult to judge, how do you tell if somebody's racist or not? But because it was graded, we knew it was important. If it's not evaluated in the military, it's not very important. Well, it was graded. And that stayed in our minds. And through my time in the military, I did see equal opportunity by and large, not perfectly, but by and large. And I'll talk about the imperfections later in the show. But if you look at the track record of the military at the highest levels, you'll see that these guys all succeeded. Colin Powell became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, later Secretary of State. He became the chairman in 1989. Right now, the chief of staff of our Air Force is General C.Q. Brown, who used to be out here in Hawaii as the PACAF commander. And Friday, I was at the change of command for Indo-Pacific Command, and the presiding officer was former General, now Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. So they are succeeding at very high levels. I experienced a meritocracy. I watched African Americans succeed. So we're good, right? No, we're not good. We have a lot to do. And I'm going to tell you why right after we look at what's coming up in future shows. So you can see the episodes that are coming. I'm not going to go into great depth. May 17th, I will have Ross Rowley on, the math major, who also takes all my money on the golf course. And there are a lot of fun, sort of normal Figment shows that I hope you'll join me for. I also hope you'll join me for Figments on Reality, a bi-weekly commentary show that will be on when Figments on Reality, or Figments, the Power of Imagination isn't. So every other Monday. And that's going to be commentary and storytelling. And I look forward to sharing some of my thoughts with you during those shows. But let's get back to this difficult topic at hand. As I said, African Americans played a disproportionate role in my success. I don't know why, but they did. It's not just Hank Aaron being a hero or Martin Luther King having the influence on our country that he did. And a little Martin Luther King connection about how much influence he had on me as a single seat fighter pilot, very often, not every time, but very often, on takeoff, I'd raise the gear and flaps and say into my oxygen mask for me and me alone, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I am free at last because I found freedom in the sky. And Martin Luther King embodied, exemplified freedom for all. So he did have a role. But there were others who played equally, maybe more important roles in a professional sense. And the first was a colonel at the time. Here's a picture of him as a one star, James T. Body Jr. I was stationed in Korea in my second operational assignment, and General Body was Colonel Body at the time, was our wing commander, and as you can see, African American. I joined the wing staff as an evaluator pilot, a check pilot, and therefore had to take things in for him to sign policy letters, changes to flight rules and regulations. And one day I did that, and I didn't think he knew me from Hogan's Scope. I was a pretty good fighter pilot, says me, and good at my job, but not very good at life. And we didn't have many limits for fighter pilots in the 70s, but I was at least pressing those. So I took the letter in for Colonel Body to sign, gave it to him, and in due course, he signed it like in a minute. And I thought I was done. And he said, Dan, have a seat. And he sat me down and he talked to me about limits, talked to me about, okay, you're doing a good job, but you've got to do more, and the personal side matters. And he shared very openly his experience as a Black airman fighter pilot in the 60s and 70s. He had a distinguished flying and combat record. And I don't know why he opened up to me, but it was powerful. And his willingness to share was remarkable, but also hearing his experiences left an imprint too. So thanks, Colonel Body, General Body. I reached out to him about a year ago, found his email, and get to thank him, kind of an electronic person. But he made a difference. And so in my next assignment, after leaving Korea, where I served with him, I came here to Hawaii and was at the headquarters Pacific Air Forces. And as part of that tour, I met and decided to marry somebody, a woman of Asian American descent, Chinese, ethnically Chinese from Taiwan. So, so what? So a well-meaning lieutenant colonel in my office, a good guy, and not a racist, took me aside and said, didn't say Fig because I had a different nickname at the time that I won't share with you, but he said, if you marry her, it's going to hurt your career. That pissed me off. And I'm pretty stubborn, so I did it anyway. But it also made me committed to showing that our Air Force was better than that it was your performance and potential, not some arbitrary criteria like race, color, creed, gender, or who you married would influence how far you went. And it seems to have worked out okay. Another thing it did was solidify in me the importance of equal opportunity. So as a commander, I was commander 7 times, I think. Every time I took command of an organization or when new people came in, I'd give my equal opportunity speech, and it was pretty simple. I'd talk about priorities, things I cared about, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'd say, the last thing you need to know about me, and you can't know this, can't know me if you don't know this, is that equal opportunity is my core value. And I would generally say, I don't need an F in regulation, law, rule, policy letter for it to be my core value. I believe it's the great strength in our nation. I still believe it's the great strength of the United States of America. So I'm committed to providing an equal opportunity environment as your commander, as your boss. I think I did that, but I don't think it was enough. In fact, I'm sure it wasn't enough. And in retrospect, I might have done more. So much later in my career, I guess about 15 years later, I was assigned back in Korea, its sole the Yongsan base up there where the U.S. Forces Korea headquarters were. Now they've moved, but I worked for another African American and worked directly for him, and that's General Larry Ellis. He was a 2-star at the time. There's a great picture of him as a 3-star. He retired as a 4-star. Phenomenal boss, and to all my other mentors to whom I owe so much, I'm sorry, but he was the best, most influential, most important mentor I had because we worked. I was his deputy director of operations. We worked very closely together, and at the end of every day for a year, General Ellis would call me in his office, and we'd have what can only be described as a father-son chat. And they were great. They were long, and there were times that I wanted to get home to dinner, but they were important. And he would talk to me sometimes about the issues of the day within the headquarters, the latest problem with North Korea, often about his experience as a combat infantryman in Vietnam, which were really important to me when I later served in combat, and never about racism, never about being a black 2-star general. One day early in our time together during one of these father-son chats, General Ellis said to me, Dan, I'm going to get you promoted. I was a colonel, so he's saying he was going to get me promoted to 1-star. I said, no, you're not, because I wasn't on that track. He said, yes, I am. He believed in me, and he did what it took. That I'm not the focus of this story, so I won't go into details, but I would not have been a general officer but for General Larry Ellis. The real importance of my relationship with this great soldier and great man is that I saw the racism he faced from peers, other general officers, and I hated it. But he never talked about it. He didn't seem affected by it. But I hate it, and I still hate it thinking about it. For somebody like that to face racism just makes me sick. And that leads me to where I am now, believing that the US military still has much more to do with regards to racism. And that doesn't just have to do with the events of the last year. It has the most to do with the motorcycle ride. And now you know why I'm wearing the shirt and why the bike's in the background. And it came from a ride that I took in 2008 when I retired from the military. I rode to the four corners of the US, Seattle, Washington, to Blaine, Washington, to San Ysidro, to Key West, to Maine. That's where the picture was taken. I'm every bit as cold and tired as I look in that photo. And but it was glorious. And I rode about 600 miles a day for more than 10 days. And at some point, a few days before that photo, I was riding into Virginia from North Carolina when I got a flat tire. And any of you who ride know that's not good, especially at the speed limit, we'll call it. And so I had to do something about it. Pulled over in a gas station and put a temporary fix, more air and some of that goop you can put into tires, but I knew it wasn't going to last. So um, there was a town with a Harley dealer there. I'd never been to it in North Carolina, but I had my little Garmin and set out to get a new tire. And the weather, by the way, was awful. It was one of those huge spring thunderstorms coming that would eventually deliver a bunch of rain, lightning, and hail. So I knew I had to get to the dealer. As I looked for the Harley dealership, I pulled over to make a left-hand turn, waiting for the green arrow, and pulled up next to a sport bike, a crotch rocket, as us Harley riders call it. And on that bike was a young black man and his significant other, I assume. And if I had met him on the street, I don't know what I would have thought about him because he was as unlike me as can be. Very fit, muscular, tattoos, if I remember correctly, and just intimidating. But I didn't care. I was cold, tired, needed to get to the dealer. So I asked him, hey, do you know where the Harley dealership is? And he said, yeah, it's right over here. I'll take you there. I was surprised, but great. I need all the help I can get. And we started to head to the Harley dealership, and we went about a half mile, three quarters of a mile, and the tire finally completely gave up the ghost. And I signaled him and pointed to the tire, and we pulled over. And I said, "Hey, I'll call a truck, and they'll come get me, and I'll get the tire fixed." And this young man said, "I'll wait here with you till the truck comes." He had no reason to do that. And let me tell you, his passenger was not impressed with that idea at all, but he did it. And I thank him for it. Now, I wish I could meet him someday. I've thought about him often since. And what I've thought is, would I have been that compassionate, considerate, and helpful if the roles were reversed? And the answer is hell no. I know me. I know the kind of person I am, and some of it is aggressive and occasionally angry, and being treated unfairly my whole life because of the color of my skin would leave me angry all the time. So when I see memes and tweets about what the 12 things the media won't tell you about this or that victim, a black victim of institutional bias, that pisses me off too, because we don't know how they got there. We haven't lived that. And if I lived it, I don't think I'd be somebody you'd like, because it's not fair. Life's not fair, but that's not fair and not what I envision for our country. All of the events of the past years, past year, tell us we have a lot of work to do. So I'd like to tell you what I have come to believe we must do. And I'm not preaching except to myself. We do need to love our neighbors even if they're not in our neighborhood. We need to recognize that by countering racism, we're investing in our own future, not in the future of people of different colors. Our nation will only be better when we're all better. And I think probably the most important epiphany I've had is to recognize that the continuum of slavery to segregation to mass incarceration of African Americans is a horribly corrosive force on our democracy. And I don't have a solution. If I did, I wouldn't be here, and I'd probably already have a Nobel Prize. But we have to address that, because that corrosion will erode all of our freedom, all of our liberty, not just select parts of it. It must be addressed. But I'm here more to talk about what the military needs to do. I think I have some practical advice, because identifying problems is not particularly helpful. So, what should we do? I think, first of all, whatever we do can't be superficial. It can't be something that we just try to fix with buzzwords and band aids and something highly visible. It takes hard work. Step one, I think, is to recognize in the military that racism is a readiness issue. Anything that affects negatively the cohesiveness of our force makes us less ready to confront the challenges of the future. And they're going to be great, because that's life. Earth is a tough town. Um, it's a readiness issue. And you can't counter racism with equal opportunity. That's not enough. I believe that the term to be used is anti racist. I don't like it much because anti sounds so negative, but you're either for it or against it. And if you don't recognize racism and say, I'm against that, you're not doing enough. And the only way to do that is to understand the history of racism. And that's why leaders at all levels, officers and NCOs, should become educated, not indoctrinated, but educated about the history of racism. My daughter Yating recommended the book Stamped from the Beginning. That's one way to start. It's gonna, folks like me are going to hear some things that make them pretty uncomfortable, but they don't make me hate my country. They make me want my country to be better. And then those same leaders at all levels need to observe and look for the kind of racism I saw with General Ellis. They need to listen to those who have experienced it. And by the way, if they've experienced it themselves, they need to share. And I'd like to give a shout out to General C.Q. Brown, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who posted a remarkable video doing exactly that, sharing his experience. They need to learn thoughtfully about racism, how it's manifested, and what an effect it has on an organization and a country. And then they need to do something. Part of doing something is having those hard conversations. I'd much rather talk about flying fighters and what a great time that is, or winning a battle, or almost anything. But if we don't address this, we won't get beyond equal opportunity to equality. And if we don't do that, we won't be as good as we need to be. And from a moral perspective, I would submit that those of our fellow citizens who raise their right hand and volunteer to make potentially the ultimate sacrifice, in particular, deserve all the benefits of our freedom and our liberty. So, hard stuff. We've got work to do to do it. Again, if you have anything to share with me that you liked or didn't like, please drop me a line at info@phase-1.com. Comment on the videos, do whatever you want, but let's have a conversation. Again, Figments on Reality will debut on May 24th, and I hope you found this meaningful. I have. I believe in our country and look forward to working together to make it even better. Aloha and mahalo.